Welcome to the My Personal Football Coach Youth Soccer Player Development Podcast, episode 48 with Gregg Broughton.
Welcome to MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Soccer Player Development Podcast. Discover all the secrets, hints and tips about soccer player development and soccer coaching from some of the leading figures in world soccer. Here's your host, Saul Isaacson-Hurst.
Hi guys, welcome back to another show. Well into lockdown here in London. Well, just started lockdown here, so wherever you are in the world, I hope you're safe and keep yourself busy while we're all quarantined. Like I said, I've been doing lots of podcasts. Just recorded, obviously got this one coming out today. Just did one a minute ago, just before I started getting this one ready for getting live. Got a couple more this week. So hopefully going to keep you guys entertained when we're all stuck indoors. Got a big one else coming as well with Michael Beale and Harry Watling, so two giants of not only academy football but now obviously Michael at Rangers. It's really they've agreed to do like a question and answer session. So if you got a question for Michael Beale or Harry Watling, obviously Harry's been on the show before. West Ham academy coach, has worked at Millwall and Chelsea as well. You can just email me Saul at mypersonalfootballcoach.com and we can get your answer to those questions. So I'm going to do that at the end of the week. But back to this show here, Gregg Broughton, academy manager at Bodø Glimt in Norway. Gregg's had a great, illustrious career in academy football. Academy manager at Norwich, worked in Recruitment in Norwich, at Luton Town, Rushden and Diamonds. So he's been there, done that, worked his way up from the beginning. This is a really interesting show, really interesting interview with Gregg, sharing his time at the academy. He's working his way up, obviously didn't have a playing career as such in the game, so interesting how he worked his way up and the key messages of working hard, putting the extra hours in, and what he describes as working an awful lot to make it in the game, to create that reputation, and working with some top players down the world, with Ben Chilwell at Leicester, identifying him as a 9-year-old, obviously Max Aarons at Luton, someone obviously I know very well. So really interesting interview, really blessed to have him on the show, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one. So I hope you enjoy it. Remember, keep safe, and and we can get through this one together. Take care. So Gregg Broughton, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give us a little bit of a brief outline of your playing and coaching experience up to this point?
Yeah, sure. I figured out quite quickly that I wasn't going to be good enough to be a player at 15, 16, so I started coaching. Did the old prelim award, and then just backed that up by going away and studying and doing my sports science qualifications to kind of support that. And then got a lucky break in the game, coaching part-time at Wyombe Wanderers. And then from there, moved on, did some work in America. Then got my first full-time opportunity at Rushden and Diamonds and had 6 great years there. Got the opportunity to go to Luton and had a further 6 great years there. And then I had the opportunity to go and work with Norwich City and had 6 years at Norwich before finally moving over here to Norway 2 years ago.
Fantastic. So tell us a bit about that. What was that first experience at Wycombe like? What was your first job there?
I was heading up recruitment. I was kind of given an area which was part of Buckinghamshire, Milton Keynes. These were the days where academies were just kind of starting to work with 9 and 10-year-olds, because before that the academies weren't working with players to the age of 14. So my job was to kind of go out and identify 8 and 9-year-olds with some potential, bring them in and start coaching them once or twice a week in Milton Keynes, and then to go down to Bisham Abbey a couple of times a week to work with the squads there as well.
So did you have any experience in this previously?
Not in a professional game, no. I'd coached at a grassroots level, and I've gone and got my what would be the equivalent of a level 2 now. And I knew Wycombe were looking to kind of expand their work throughout Buckinghamshire a little bit, so that was my opportunity to go in and start working there.
So the question's going to be then, what are you looking for from a 9 and 10-year-old at that age? Was it difficult understanding what the level was? They say in academy football, didn't they? I suppose a big difference between academy football and the grassroots football.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is there wasn't really any benchmarks, because academy football was only just very much starting with 9 and 10-year-olds. And the second thing, I was only just starting, so I didn't really have a clue. I think it's very, very easy to spot who the best footballer on the pitch is at any age group. Anybody could do that. But I think I was very much learning on my feet at that stage. So I was kind of learning the lessons and making the mistakes that we all have to make to carry on in our careers.
So then tell us a little bit about that first experience in the game. What was it like? What were the major challenges? What were your main takeaways that you took the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think the one of the biggest lessons was, I think you learned very quickly that the club badge didn't really matter at all. If you were good with young players and could communicate with their parents and give them an idea with what you were doing, then they would usually at least come and have a look and see how you were with things. So we were trying to set up in an area where, don't forget, MK Dons hadn't really come into Milton Keynes at that stage. So Luton were doing a little bit of work in the area and Leicester were doing a little bit of work in the area. But we were able to come in and attract some parents into a new project. Wycombe were quite new to the Football League, so nobody really knew who they were in Milton Keynes at that stage. But I felt we were able to come in and make an impact and work with some young players who've gone on and had half-decent careers. But like I said, we also made a lot of mistakes at that time as well. When I look back on the coaching, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe that was kind of what I thought was high-level coaching at that stage. When I went back and thought about some of the ways we were approaching players, that wasn't particularly professional when I look back about how I would do that now at this stage of my career. But I think we were competitive with what we were doing because I think the whole industry was learning at that stage.
Interesting. So then how long did you spend there at Wycombe?
I had 2 years part-time at Wycombe Wanderers. And then I was really lucky. I got my first full-time break with Rushden and Diamonds, who themselves were a brand new club. An unbelievable learning environment for me to go into in terms of the people that I could go and work alongside and observe and learn from, and thinking about where some of those people had been in their careers and have gone to with their careers. So sorry, Greg, did
you go to America before between that?
Yeah, I went to America, started going to America when I was at university, so started doing summers out there and then got more time and was working out there kind of 6 months, 9 months at a time. And then when I came back to start working at Wycombe Wanderers, I was kind of just going out there in the close season. And then I had a difficult decision to make because I was offered a job full-time in America with a club who was going to kind of sponsor me through my green card. And then I also got the opportunity at the same time to go full-time into Rushden and Diamonds. And I chose at that stage to kind of stay in the UK and try and build my career from there.
So just before we go to Rushden, it's just interesting because when I was speaking to Anthony Hayes yesterday from Charlton, he talked about America. It was a really important part of my career. I think it's a great opportunity just to get so many hours on the grass, didn't you? Like, it's a great way to cut your teeth, and unless you are lucky enough to be full-time, you're very rarely going to be coaching 2 or 3 hours every single day.
Yeah, I think the two things you learn from America is, first of all, it's like you said, there's hours underneath the belt. I think about when the Beatles, and you read about how the Beatles kind of learnt their trade and went for hours or just in a minibus driving around Germany and playing gigs with nobody there. And I think when you learn your trade, you have to spend hours doing it. And I think the other thing is, because the conditions aren't always great and the players you were working with weren't always great, you had to be able to entertain them. You had to keep them focused and wanting to be there. And sometimes you were coaching 6 hours a day in 90-degree heat, very little shade. And your sessions had to be engaging, and you had to really want the youngsters to come and be part of that. So I think the part of your coaching that you never learn on any coaching courses, that was where I kind of learned that out there in America. And I made some great friends along the way as well.
Okay, cool. So then tell us about the Rushden job. What was that like when you went in there? I mean, it's quite fortunate as well. There's not that many full-time jobs knocking around in football. So you must have, you were quite fortunate to get offered one. You're obviously a man in high demand.
Yeah, well, not really at that stage. I was 2000, so again, full-time jobs in football were tiny compared to how it is now with Cat 1 and Cat 2 academies. So I got the opportunity initially to go in and set the community scheme up at Rushden and Diamonds. It was a new club. They were really, really ambitious, had unbelievable facilities, really, really good staff. And then my first year there, we were very lucky. We got promoted to the Football League. Pipped Yeovil at the post to get promoted from the conference as it was in those days. So all of a sudden then we had to set up a youth policy as well as a community policy. So I was able to be involved with that from the outset. And Jeff Harrop came into the club from Colchester and had some great years working alongside Jeff. But also the first team staff who were very close to it as well. Brian Talbot was the manager with obviously fantastic playing experience for Arsenal and England. His number 2 was was Terry Wesley, who's obviously gone on to manage himself in the Football League, but also oversee academies at West Ham, at Derby, etc. We had Barry Hunter there as a player and then as a player coach. And then Barry has obviously gone on to be head of first team recruitment at Liverpool. Steve Spooner, who's gone on to be under 18 coach at Birmingham City. So a really, really fantastic group of people to be around and to learn from. And every single day that was a learning environment. That was my university, my 6 years at Rushden and Diamonds. The learning I did there was unbelievable.
So you were there setting up the community scheme, and what were you doing in the academy?
Again, it started off with player recruitment and then eventually went on to be, as it was called in those days, the youth development officer, the role that would be academy manager now. We had to attack it from two different angles because we had nothing. We didn't have a single player in the building, and then after getting promoted, we had to put an under 18 youth team out a few weeks or a few months later. So we kind of attacked it by looking at players who were kind of coming out of other professional clubs in the area. And we picked up players like Lee Tomlin, who came out of Leicester City at 16, Simeon Jackson. And then at the same time, we were going in and working with 8, 9, 10-year-olds in the area to try and build up the academy from the bottom end as well. And that was where we brought in players like Ben Chilwell, who's now obviously at Leicester City in England, and many others as well, who are at the bottom end of the academy as well. So it was to build a coaching structure, a coaching syllabus, sports science, as it was in its very early days then, bringing physiotherapists, coaches, etc. So that was the project at Rushden.
So it's interesting, people associate working in football with the glamorous type of role, glamorous task, but obviously how much glamour was there down at Rushden and Diamonds, assuming that you're on a quite a tight budget and had to work some miracles?
Yeah, zero budget initially, and then a very small budget once the Football League started putting some money into it. But it was brilliant. It was long hours, 15, 16 hours a day, 5, 6 days a week, with very few breaks in the summertime. But I was still very early in my career, and I was able to throw myself completely into that. And we built up a group of coaches who were equally prepared to do that. And I think it just became infectious, that kind of desire to improve yourself and improve everyone else in the building. And like I say, because the facilities at Rushden and Diamonds were spectacular, they were unbelievable. When I think back to facilities I've worked on since then that was also a really glamorous place to drive into and think, oh, I'm so lucky and privileged to be working in this environment, especially compared to how we'd had it at Wyombe Wanderers, where we hadn't been so privileged with the facilities. So that was really good as well.
So then tell us a little bit then, you've got to create a curriculum, a club philosophy from scratch. How do you go about that? What did that look like? Are you playing like a non-league team, or are you trying to play like a Guardiola's Pep Barcelona?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, it was completely detached from how the first team wanted to play at those days, because Rushden were lucky. They had a very, very big playing budget at that day, and were able to go and sign who they wanted to in terms of the lower leagues, and got promoted all the way up to League One in the end. So we had a little bit more of a holistic approach to putting together the curriculum, but it was still the first time I'd ever done something like that. So I was very lucky. I went and spent time with good people who I felt I could learn from and talk to and pick up ideas from. So I went and spent time with other academy managers and said, how did you do that? What would you do again if you were starting with the knowledge you've got now?
Can you give some name drop? Who did you go and speak to? And
I think that was that. Yeah, I think I went and started speaking to people like Ricky Martin, who was at Norwich at the time, people like Dan Ashworth, who was at Cambridge United at the time. So people like Stuart Smith and Dean Rastrick, who were at Luton at the time. So people like that. And then obviously in-house, we had a lot of knowledge as well in terms of Terry Wesley and the work he'd done at Ipswich and at Luton before he'd come over to Rushden and Diamonds. So it was kind of begging, stealing and borrowing bits from those people. And they were all kind enough to share their ideas and their thoughts with me. And we had a good group of people in-house as well, in terms of Jeff Harrop, in terms of Paul Driver, some very talented and hard-working individuals. And between us, we were able then to kind of create that piece of work.
So give us a little bit of a taste of that piece of work. What did that look like in practice? I mean, your sessions like Friend on the Line, for example. Yeah.
At that stage, I think it was very limited in terms of how a coaching syllabus might look now. I think in terms of small-sided games, I think if I reflect back on it now, it was a lot more individually technically driven than it was game based. And I think we had small spaces to work on. The AstroTurf pitch that it was a Rushden and Diamonds was probably a 50 by 30. So it was a small space to work on. So there's lots of technical work, lots of 4 and 5-a-side games to support that. But very rarely did we get to go onto the grass, especially with the players before the age of 16, and do anything in big spaces.
Interesting. And what about, because you're almost creating a culture, if you like. We talk about a lot in academy football. It's almost cliche. How do you create a culture from nothing? What are the expectations you're looking for? You talked about working hard and trying to get everyone to improve. How do you get the buy-in from coaches? How do you get everyone on the same page?
I think we were lucky to have a group of coaches who bought into that philosophy straight away. And whether that was intentional by bringing those coaches in or more luck, I still really don't know.
What was your coaching staff? How many coaches did you have, like part-time and full-time?
Yeah, it was a majority part-time. We probably had 4 or 5 full-time, and the rest of the staff were part-time, so probably 15 to 20 part-time coaches. We did a lot of in-service, delivered in-house by ourselves, supported by the county FA in Northamptonshire. And we really just kind of, the one thing that Brian Talbot brought in from the first team level, and this is where there was the one kind of connect from the first team down to the academy in terms of the philosophy and the culture was hard work and being humble. And I think those two things underpinned everything we tried to do at Rushden. And again, you're in an catchment area there where you're going up, you had Northampton Town on your doorsteps, obviously as your local rival, and Peterborough United going the other direction. But then you also had some very, very big clubs in terms of Leicester City and Aston Villa very close to you as well.
And so what did that look like, that relationship with Leicester and Villa, for instance? I mean, they're the big boys. What do you do? Just try and fight off the scraps when they don't get, or you sneaking your under-9s into your teams?
I think in those days, we really believed in ourselves. And I think the facilities we had at Rushden sold themselves. The facilities we had there were probably as good as some of the other clubs who were in the Premier League at that time in terms of what we had to work with. So we really believed that once we brought a young player into Nen Park and showed them the facilities and showed them the coaching staff, that they'd want to be there. And I think we were very lucky to be able to attract some of the young players and young coaches we had working with us at the time into that project. So we didn't really build relationships with any of those clubs. It was more, I think we were quite, we really believed in ourselves, and we were quite bullish in saying, if we do things properly here and if we do things well, people will buy into what we're doing and not want to go elsewhere.
So tell us a little bit about Ben Chilwell then, what he looked like as an under-9. Interesting to look at, could you tell he was going to be a player?
Ben was unbelievably focused, had a very, very driven father who kept him on the straight and narrow and kept him working hard. Was athletically able, had a very strong left foot, tactically was very aware and would be a very good learner, would pick up information very quickly. But when I think about that under-9 group we had at that stage, he would be what I call a silver medalist. He'd be somebody that you could easily tell had ability, easily you could tell had potential. But if you were to go and say, look at that group now and tell me 3 players that you'd put your hat on having a playing career at the highest level, he certainly wouldn't have been in the top 2 in the group. He might have been 3rd or 4th in the group in terms of that at that stage.
That's interesting, isn't it? One academy manager referred to our academy system a bit like throwing a pack of eggs against a wall and seeing which one sticks in terms of having no idea in terms of that 9 who's going to make it. What do you think? What do you think about that? And in terms of do you think there's a lot of talk about how our academy structures, it's a very difficult, stressful environment. Have we got it right? Do you think, or what can we do better?
Well, I think the first thing is I completely agree that anybody who tells you that they think an under-9 can play at the highest level, be that in the Premier League or in the Champions League, I'm not sure I buy into that philosophy myself. I think you can see who good players are, and I think you can see who players who have athletic potential are, and I think you can see who players who have mental potential. I think you can see potential in all of those areas, but nobody knows what the road is going to look like for those players over the next 10 years. if I skip forward to now where I am in Norway, where players don't come into the academy system till 13, that works here in Norway. In the system we've got here, that works. I'm not sure it would work in the UK. The reason it works here in Norway is two things. The grassroots facilities are unbelievable. And the players get exposed to grassroots coaching, good or bad, 4 or 5 times a week. So a grassroots player here at under 9 or under 10 would have 4 or 5 training sessions a week. Whereas in the UK, again, grassroots coaches, good or bad, facilities, good or bad, they just don't get the exposure to the time and the hours needed. School sports struggles to provide that, especially in primary schools as well. So I really believe in the academy system in the UK is right for what the demands of the UK system are. But you have to also accept, and you have to be brutally honest with parents from the outset, that the chances of them coming in at 9 and going all the way through the system are absolutely minimal. But what they should have is a great life experience, make friends for life, and come out of it thinking that was a good experience. I enjoyed that. I didn't make it through, but I enjoyed the experience, and now I'll end up playing wherever I end up playing.
What were your major takeaways from your time there at Rushden in terms of thinking about professionally how you evolved? You know, I look back at my time at certain clubs, think, you know, there's different stages I sort of, you know, matured definitely and took to different things from different clubs. What were the main things you took from Rushden?
I think the main thing is I was given absolute responsibility and given a blank sheet to work with. So by doing that, I kind of learned the importance of autonomy and ensuring that your people working under you have the ability to do that as well. But I think also I made a lot of mistakes at Rushden. So many different things, so many things where I think if I could go back and do that time again, I'd do that differently. So I think it's also the ability to reflect on those mistakes and say, well, don't keep making them. Next time, do it differently if you recognise that.
Interesting. So then tell us a little bit then about your next challenge. What was that and how did it come about?
Well, it was the opportunity to go to Luton. So Luton was my hometown club. It was the club I grew up as a supporter of. And obviously I was very lucky growing up in the 80s. Luton were a top flight team playing Liverpool and Man United and Arsenal and Tottenham every single week. And I was lucky to go with my dad and watch those games and be schooled really in a really excellent playing style of football in terms of how David Pleat got his team to play, and then Jimmy Ryan, who took over from David Pleat, and Ray Harford and some of the other great coaches Luton had in the 80s. So I was kind of schooled by that style of playing and that way of trying to set your team up to play. So the opportunity then to go to Luton was a no-brainer really for me. Luton were in the Championship at the time, so this was 2006. They'd just finished outside the playoffs. They had on paper an unbelievable youth policy with players like Curtis Davis and Leon Barnett and Kevin Foley, and all of these players going and playing in Luton's first team and then being sold on to the Premier League. So it was a great opportunity. And again, my first job was to go in there and look at player recruitment. So
what was your role? Head of recruitment?
Yeah, so I was working in the academy with player recruitment. And again, trying to tackle 2 different age groups. So I think because Luton had a little spell where they'd fallen down the leagues, they'd probably had to cut some budget back and cut some time back. So they felt their 12s to 14s wasn't a particularly strong age group for them, or strong set of age groups for them. So it was doing some work in those age groups, but also doing some work with the under 8s and under 9s as well. So with the 12s to 14s, we went in and we kind of focused a lot. And I think what I learned then straight away is that at that stage, maybe not now, but at that stage, a lot of the clubs around that stretch of the M1 going into North London did an unbelievable job with 8s and 9s, but maybe took their eye off the ball then if the players weren't ready. So I felt we had a lot of success mopping up where other clubs had maybe written a player off at 8 or 9, or maybe he'd even been into a club and come out again. And those players were just playing local football. So we were able to go in and by working hard and spending a lot of time and hours going and watching local football to find those players and bring them into that environment and then allow them to have some success with us.
And what were the main differences in terms of the comparisons, the contrast between Luton when you went in there and the previous clubs where you'd worked?
Well, the first thing is Luton had a history of producing young players, international footballers, top-level footballers, and knew how it was done. So I had to go in there and be open-minded to try and learn and not try and think that I'd already cracked the way of doing it just from my limited experience that I'd already had in my career. But I would say the facilities at Luton were very, very limited. A huge come down in facilities from from Rushden and Diamonds, who'd just been relegated back out the Football League, to Luton, who were in the Championship at the time, a huge step down in facilities. And to be honest with you, if I compare the level of players we had at Rushden compared to where they were when I went into Luton, probably not a huge difference at that stage. Luton had a much richer history of producing young players, but were maybe going through a dip at that stage in terms of what was in their programme, 9s to 18s.
And so you talked about the facilities. I mean, what were the facilities at the time?
Yeah, well, we used to train at Vauxhall, as it was now, the Brace, which is Luton's first team training ground now, which was a very basic sand-based AstroTurf pitch that you shared. And one time you'd have a men's five-a-side game going on the other half of the pitch with players swearing and footballs flying across. Next time there might be a hockey practice going on next to you. And then obviously the club was based out of Kenilworth Road, which even then in those days was a very tired stadium, a fantastic atmosphere on a match day, but not an amazing work environment. And then during my time as well, Luton moved to Ely Way as a training ground under Kevin Blackwell, which was a step up for Luton, but still not a great facility when I compare to what I got to work in at Norwich. But then also when you travel and go to Tottenham or to Chelsea or to Southampton or to Liverpool or some of the other great facilities now in the UK. So facilities were limited, but an unbelievable catchment area in terms of young players who were hungry and prepared to work hard and to sacrifice what's needed to get where they need to get to in the game.
And tell us about the playing style at Luton and the academy. What was that, and was it different than where you've been before? Yeah,
it was different in that it was defined in that the teams played. They tried to play. Established play from the back was very clear. They wanted their central defenders to get on the ball and to be able to play. They wanted to try and play between lines, and that went all the way up to the first team. So there was a defined playing philosophy that was there at the club. Whereas obviously when I'd gone into Rushden and Diamonds, we were doing everything from the start, if that makes sense.
Interesting. And so tell us a bit then, as people who work in academy football, when you're trying to recruit someone, a lot of it's about trying to sell the club to the parents and the player. How did you, convince players to come to Luton rather than, so you got your Arsenal, you got Tottenham, Watford, those big clubs, powerhouses down the road maybe, and then you got people at the other side up the M1. How did you compete with those clubs?
Well, I think two things. I think first of all, the history of the club, and like I said, at that time the club had I think 6 players playing in the Premier League. I think it had 2 or 3 players who travelled to the World Cup during that period as well. So it had international and Premier League level players who'd come through the system. So you had that to sell the club and the history of the club. But we also had an unbelievable set of staff there. And I always felt that once we could get a young player and his parents in front of those coaches, they would really sell the club for us. And when I think about some of the people, and I'm going to leave people out here, which isn't deliberate, but there were so many great people. And when I think about John D'Souza, now at Colchester United, Stuart English, now at Birmingham City, Tony McCall, Jay Marshall, who's now head of player recruitment at Norwich, Scott Smith, who's also at Norwich City now, Alan Nielsen, lots of amazing coaches who've gone on and worked and been academy managers or assistant academy managers, heads of coaching. Paul Driver came over with me from Rushden and Diamonds, so we had a really, really talented group of coaches there who helped sell the club as well. Stuart Smith was already at the club when I went there, and he was very, very good at trying to make sure the best 8 and 9-year-olds stayed within the club once we got them inside the door.
Interesting. And then tell us then a little bit then about your next challenge. Then what's happened? What was the next job opportunity, and how did it come about?
Well, the time at Luton, it became a very tough time towards the end because Luton had been relegated from the Football League because of starting with a minus 30 points due to financial irregularities. And when we were out of the Football League, we really struggled to keep players on contract because the Football League rules made that very difficult. So we were beginning to lose a lot of the top players, and that made the job, it became less and less about player development and more about just trying to keep the whole thing alive, which we stuck with for 2 years, and then eventually we lost a playoff final at the Etihad to AFC Wimbledon. And at that stage we knew all of the players were no longer protected, and then it became messy the next year. We were having to go to tribunals and this kind of stuff. So the reason I got into football had disappeared, and it became about survival. And because I was a Luton supporter and passionate about it, I was giving it my everything and doing some insane hours to try and keep the whole thing alive. But some of the best coaches were being attracted by other clubs, and the players were at that stage as well. So when I had the opportunity, that this was the first year of EPPP, so 2012, and had the opportunity to go and meet with Norwich City to become their head of player recruitment for the academy. So it was a new project for Norwich, really. They'd made the step up from the old academy system to become a Cat 1. They'd invested a lot of money under the board of directors there and the owner Delia Smith. So the opportunity to go in there and work in a Cat 1 environment was, again, a huge learning. Much better facilities than they were at Luton. But again, I have to say that by the time we'd left Luton, we had some unbelievable players in the system, some unbelievable teams of players in the system. And when I went over to Norwich, probably my first impression was this might actually be a step down in terms of the top level of players. So Norwich obviously had some good players in the system, but I probably felt Luton had more players with potential in their 9s to 18s programme at that stage than Norwich did. So it did feel almost a little bit like starting again in terms of having to go through that cycle again.
Well, why do you think that was? Is that because of the catchment area, or just maybe due to just investment 100%. In recruitment?
No. Yeah, it's exactly those two things you just said there. So you've hit the nail on both of them. Norwich had a spell where, although I joined them in the Premier League, they'd been relegated to League One a couple of years previously before Lambert had got back-to-back promotions, and they'd had to cut right back on their on their player recruitment. So they had a really talented player recruiter called Paul Lowe, who'd left the club. He then went to Liverpool and is now at Tottenham. And they just had to take their eye off the ball because it was about survival at that stage. But also the population density and diversity in Norfolk wasn't, in my impression going into the club, and also my impression having come out of the club, enough to support a Category 1 in a Premier League academy. So the first thing we began to do was to put together a strategic document about where we needed to invest our money from a recruitment point of view. And we identified 3 boroughs in London that we felt were the boroughs that were producing footballers at that stage. So we spent a lot of time and effort working with grassroots recruitment in there.
What boroughs were they?
Off the top of my head, one of them was in northeast London and the other 2 were in south London. Right. Lewisham was definitely one of them, but I can't remember the other 2 off the top of my head.
So
I'm sure Waltham Forest was probably one of those as well. So yeah. So we began to build a recruitment and a coaching team based out of London. And also obviously EPPP opened the opportunity to be able to sign players for fixed amounts of money from other football league clubs as well. So we began to look at recruitment in that part as well. And then after 2 years at Norwich, I got the opportunity to become academy manager as well. So that was an opportunity then to put some of my learning that I'd taken from Rushden and from Luton and from Wycombe into a Category 1 environment. And the major thing is Norwich had a very, very good academy at that time, great staff, really good multidisciplinary teams, had just won the FA Youth Cup with a team that has got the Murphy twins in it, Cameron McGeehan in it.
Yeah, I remember, was at the game at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, an unbelievable game at Stamford Bridge. Two great teams. When you look back and think about the talent that was on display over those 2 legs, some unbelievable players. So Norwich had a very, very successful academy, and my job was just to really go in then as academy director and try and put my own slant on things and to try and ensure that the success that we'd had in player recruitment in my first 2 years was continued.
So tell us a bit about that. How do you put your own slant on an academy with a good track record like that?
That was a challenge, Joel. I have to be honest with you. I found that hard because the previous academy director, Ricky, I'd known for many, many years. He was then the technical director at the club, so he was still there. And I think when you're going into that environment, you're conscious constantly that if you try and bring something new in, it's almost like you're saying the old thing wasn't right or wasn't working. And when the person who was doing the job was still there, that was difficult, because often it wasn't the case of saying that. It was just a case of saying, maybe here's a different way of doing it. So there was a lot of managing upwards as well as managing sideways and managing downwards. And obviously at Cat 1, it's a huge staff as well, both part-time and full-time. And I think when I reflect back on that time, I would probably do things a little bit differently, for sure, in terms of how you'd set that staff up. And maybe I wasn't brave enough to make some of the changes also that needed to be made from the outset. But also, I think that the thing that was the hardest challenge, or the biggest challenge at Norwich, was the system wasn't completely joined up in terms of the young players there wasn't an easy pathway from the academy into the first team. So if you look at Norwich now, I think I watched the FA Cup game against Tottenham a few weeks ago before football disappeared off our screens, and 5 academy players, I think, on the pitch during that game: Max Aarons, Jamal Lewis, Todd Cantwell, Ben Godfrey, and Adam Ida came as a substitute. And I would say that the group of players when I first joined Norwich in 2012, 2013, it's a hypothetical discussion, but one that should be had, was whether that current group of players in Norwich's first team, the current group of academy players in Norwich's first team, are any better or any worse than the players who are already at the club, or was just their pathway now clearer, more established, and have somebody who's able to join the club up and say, actually, no, we can't bring this player in because Jamal Lewis is ready to play at left back, or let's not bring another striker in this window now because Adam Ida is ready to be the 4th choice striker. So I think it was missing that person who was able to do that, and it wasn't joined up enough at the top end, which ultimately, if you look at Chelsea now, Chelsea looks unbelievable because all of a sudden all of these players that we've all known for many years are good enough to get in the first team are in the first team and doing well, and everything looks rosy. But it needs somebody to come in and say, I'm brave enough to put those players in the team.
I suppose bravery is everything, though, isn't it? I mean, for argument, well, Norwich would looked like they were going to get relegated this season. But they do, they get relegated, do they come back up? Maybe next season they don't have such a good year. Suddenly, maybe that system changes. I suppose it is, how long, when it's looking good, it's looking good. When the sun's out, the sun's out. If you know what I mean.
No, but this is the biggest piece of learning I've taken from that experience, I think. And if I'm lucky enough to go in and ever be a technical director, a sporting director at the club myself now, I think the thing you have to try and do, and the thing we try and do here in Norway now, is to ensure that the strategy and the vision is joined up from beginning to end, and that everybody can buy it, from supporters to the owners of the club, buy into that. So what I think Stuart Webber's done brilliantly at Norwich is saying, this is the strategy, we're going to believe in it, and even when things weren't looking great after Christmas in the Championship and they took nearer the bottom end of the table, at the top end of the table, they didn't make any changes, they stuck with it, and even if they get relegated now, they'll still stick with it. They haven't tried to change things. They haven't tried to change their style of play. They've been brave and stuck with that, and I think they'll reap enormous rewards from that. If nothing else, previously they were selling academy players for 10, 11, 12 million pounds a player, in terms of when the Murphys left the club, etc. Now, if you put a price on any of those 5 names that I mentioned previously, it would be several times more than that.
It's interesting. So let's talk about one of those players, Max Aarons, who obviously I know very well, and you do as well. For down the years, I started working with him when you were at Luton, ironically enough. Well, Jim was just about to leave, so he had like an really interesting story. But I mean, when he came to Norwich only a few years ago, without a club. I mean, obviously, with your relationship, were you involved in that decision, and did you envisage him going on in only a few years being one of the best right backs in the Premier League?
Yeah, I think I was lucky enough to work with Max and get to know both of his parents over many years at Luton, and I think when he chose to leave Luton and look to try and join a Category 1 club at the age of kind of 14, 15, he found that hard because physically he hadn't developed at that stage, and I think clubs weren't prepared to take the gamble that was needed compensation-wise in order to do that. And when his dad contacted me, we spoke about Max's opportunity to come into Norwich. I was very keen because Max had three big attributes. Technically, he was a very, very strong player. Athletically, he had enormous potential. But his ability to learn and take on information, which is one of the absolute key things in player development, in my opinion, was at the highest level. So we were prepared to overlook the fact that he hadn't really gone through his growth spurt yet. And I think the big thing at Norwich then was to convince the coaches that he could come in and improve the group of players they had, and they had the potential to get him out the other side. So I remember I had many conversations with Max and with his mother about the plan of how we thought we'd try and do that. And towards the end of my time at Luton, he was an under-12 playing in the under-13s, and we began to use him in wide areas because of his repeated sprint ability and because of his ability in 1v1 duels. So my job was, obviously, when he was going around the other Premier League clubs, he was being looked at as a midfielder because that's where he played most of his time. And I felt if he had an opportunity at Norwich, it was probably going to be in wide areas. Ideally, we felt as a fullback, because the style of play that Norwich played and continue to play now, where their fullbacks are very high up the pitch and get lots of opportunities to go 1v1 in and around the final third. But the challenge we had at the time was we had our under-18 coach, Graham Murty, was an unbelievable fullback himself, great playing career internationally and nationally with Reading, and knew what it takes to be a fullback. And I think the way we tried to attack it was one of the coaches at the time, Matt Gill, absolutely loved players with technical ability. That was his bias in terms of when he looked at players. If they had technical ability and had a good attitude, he'd really buy into them. So I very early on, after a week or two of Max being in at Norwich, I asked him to travel away to Riga to a tournament with the under-16s. Matt and Alan Nielsen took the team over there. By the time they came back, Matt was buying into it. Technically he can do this, technically he can do that. So then it became a very easy sell to Graham Murty, because at under-16, if you're going to bring a player in, really you have to give him a scholar at that stage. So to get that across the line with Graham then, Matt's experience with him was very, very important in order to do that. But to answer your question and say, were we signing him thinking that we had a player who to go on to have the success he's had at the top end of the Championship and now at the Premier League? No, I think we'd be lying if we said that. We knew he had potential. We knew he had first team potential at Norwich, but he's certainly taken huge steps in a very short amount of time, and it's fantastic to see.
So let's talk about then where you are now. You've gone to sunnier climes, as they say. You've headed up north. So tell us about that, how it happened, and where you're at. So you are.
Yeah, so the changes were beginning to happen at Norwich, and we could all see what was on the cards there, as the club were beginning to have to make cutbacks to the academy and shrink the recruitment area of players and this kind of stuff. So at that stage, I'd had a real drive to work in Scandinavia and to experience life in Scandinavia. It's something that I talked about with family and friends for a long time. So I'd had conversations with 2 or 3 clubs, and I didn't really feel that the academies were fantastic environments, but I didn't really feel that thing. You and I have already talked about solving this conversation in terms of that joined up approach from top to bottom and having a club all pulling in the same direction. I didn't really feel that those clubs were able to offer me that at this stage. And the project that came about at Glimt came from a random conversation with an agent when I was at Norwich, when we were talking about a player from somewhere else in Scandinavia, and he mentioned that a club, Bodø Glimt, were looking for an academy director, and I have to be honest with you, I didn't even know where Bodø was on the map. I'd travelled to Norway quite a bit with work and been to Oslo and been to Trondheim and 1 or 2 other cities in the country, but I'd never been to Bodø. So I had the opportunity to come and visit here, and by the time we'd been out to visit and met with the club, I'd really, really bought into the project and what they were trying to do, and it was really joined up. They were really trying to put young players in and around the first team. And they had a good group of players knocking on the door. They were one team in one county, and it's a huge county. It takes 12 hours to drive across the county. So a big recruitment area geographically, if not in population size. And they were trying to do things properly. So I bought into the project, and I've been lucky enough to be here 2 years now, and it's gone brilliantly.
So tell us a bit about Bodø then, and what sort of size club are they? What's the size of the city? What's your sort of catchment area in terms of population?
The city's 50,000 people. It's got designs to grow and become 70,000 in the next 10 to 20 years. The club is a small club, even by Norwegian standards, but has a very, very established style of play and a very proud history. Because of the geography in Norway and 1 or 2 other social reasons, clubs in the north of Norway weren't allowed to play in the national leagues until the 1970s. And then Bodø Glimt were the first club to come into the National League from the north of Norway, and then a few years later in 1975 won the cup. So really represented, a little bit like the Basque region in Spain, represent the whole region and have the whole of the north of Norway love Bodø Glimt because of what they achieved in the 1970s. They have a very, very established style of play, a 4-3-3 style of play with 1 holding midfielder and 2 interlopers, as they're called here in Norway, attacking midfielders who join in attacks, and get in the box as often as possible. So a very established style of play. The population size of the county is 250,000 people, and the population of the north of Norway is about 500,000 people. So that's our population density in terms of recruitment size. But the club has had a lot of success over the years in terms of giving young players the opportunity to go on and play, not just in the Norwegian top flight, but in Europe as well. So in terms of the Premier League and players you might have heard Alexander Tetti at Norwich, Stefan Johansson at Fulham. I'm trying to think of other players who've come through the system. Matthias Norman went to Brighton and is now at Rostock. So players who've come through and gone on and played at the highest level of Europe, because the club is very prepared and very willing and has a strategy in order of blooding young players in the first team at a very young age.
What's the average attendance at the games?
It's about 4,500. So the two big sellout games this season are when we played Tromsø, who are our local rivals in the north of Norway, although they got relegated last year, and Rosenborg, who are the Manchester United of Norwegian football. So those are the two huge games. But there are also games with much smaller attendances than that as well. I think one of the challenges for Norwegian football is a lot of football is televised. On a Sunday night, you can sit home and watch any of the games because games in Norway kick off traditionally at 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening. And on Sunday, you can sit home and watch any game. So they get very big crowds watching on TV, but it's hard then to try and attract those guys into the gates.
So then, tell us about the academy itself then, the structure. What's the setup in comparison to Norwich, for instance?
Much smaller than Norwich, especially from a support staff. Probably bigger from a coaching staff point of view than Norwich, but smaller from a support staff point of view. So 11 full-time coaches on the coaching in the coaching setup in the academy. Only one physical coach, or sports scientist as it would be called in England, and only one physiotherapist. But the other big difference is the academy doesn't start to the age of 13, which is normal in Norway. It's actually it's not legal in Norway to start selecting players before the age of 12. So when you think of a coaching staff that size without a foundation phase in there, you realise how lucky we are to have such a great resource to work with in terms of experience and coaches and player to coach ratio. So all of the academies in Norway begin their recruitment at 12 and look at players at 11 and 12, but don't select for the first time till the end of the under 12 season in terms of preparing them for the under 13 year.
And so what were your first impressions with the academy when you first went in there, and in terms of, do you think, right, these are the first things I've got to try and do or stamp my sort of own style on?
Yeah, well, the first thing I did, I was lucky that my first 3 months at the club were part-time because I was coming and going from the UK between January and March. But so I was able to kind of step back a little bit during that period, do a really detailed SWOT analysis of what I felt the strengths and weaknesses were in every single area. My first impression straight away was a really good blend of coaches, so a good mixture of coaches who were both coming from a more academic background, but also those who had a really good playing background as well. Really good group of players who'd been through the system in the coaching staff as well, so knew the club inside out, and some real kind of cultural leaders within the club. So someone like Ørjan Berg in the club, who oversees the grassroots section of the club, because the club has a grassroots department as well. And Ørjan is regularly recognised as one of the greatest players to ever come out of Norway. Had a fantastic playing career himself. Has played at the very highest level, played against Real Madrid in the Champions League when Rosenborg beat Real Madrid in the Champions League, and so has played at this kind of level. But it was also Bodø Glimt through and through, so have people who I can turn to and get advice from as well. But in terms of the players, my first impression was very similar to when I first walked in the door at Norwich. I thought there was a lot of good players in the system, but I thought the diversity of players wasn't probably wide enough in terms of saying, right, if we said here's a 13 or 14-year-old who might have the potential to be a central defender in the Elite Series or a winger in the Elite Series, I felt there probably wasn't the diversity needed compared to those lots of talented central midfield players and technical players who could get on the ball and play in small areas. So I think we had to maybe reassess the type of player we were bringing at 12 or 13, or maybe just diversify that a little bit. It had a really, really detailed and well thought out methodology that was really, really well established. A guy who was the academy director before me here at the club, a guy called Øyvind Iversen, who's now working for the equivalent of the Norwegian FA, overseeing the academy system in Norway. And he'd built an unbelievably detailed and well-researched playing methodology. So probably the strongest playing methodology I'd ever worked with, a lot stronger than the one that I had myself had left at Norwich. So my learning there was huge.
So give us a little taste of that. What do you mean by playing methodology? Give us a little bit. What is
just
it look like?
I think it was split into two areas, but in terms of the 13s to 19s playing methodology, the playing cycle is split into 6 different phases, and then each of those split into sub-phases. And the playing curriculum is always built around those phases at 13s to 19s, and then has a technical and physical program that runs alongside that. At 6 to 12s, which is via the grassroots program and via some of the work we do with development centres with 11s and 12s, it was very, very focused on individual player development, technical development of players. And again, he travelled and had unbelievable access to the very highest people in European football in terms of building that syllabus. And I felt very lucky that I could go in and go, wow, there's something here. And in one of the first meetings we'd had with the staff, the staff said to me, we've hardly had time to scratch the surface with this. Please, let's not do any changes for that. So for 2 years now, we haven't touched that. We've really just worked on it and said what works, what doesn't work, what bits do we need to tweak. And then last November, we had a big review where we kind of locked ourselves away for a week and went into everything, and everybody had the chance to present back on their thoughts on it. And that's led to some minor, but only very, very minor tweaks to the whole thing. Because the academy classification, which is the equivalent of the audit process here in Norway, has recognised our methodology as being kind of cutting edge methodology on a European level. So it would be crazy to try and change that.
What were the phases then? The 6 phases you talked about?
Yeah, they talk about established attack and established defence. So they're the 2 big ones, kind of in and out of possession. We play a really high pressing style of football, so they talk about the press, Gjenvinning, as it's called in Norwegian, and the ability to win the ball back high up the pitch, and if you need to do that, what's the starting position for your goalkeeper and your back line, etc. They talk about playing through the press as well, and then obviously there's the 2 transitions as well.
And then just tell us a little bit about what the main challenges as an Englishman in Norway coming in. Was there any cultural things that you had to deal with or things to get used to?
Yeah, I think the one of the biggest challenges is I thought it'd be a lot easier to pick up the language than it has been, because the workplace is an international workplace. There was already one English coach on the staff when I joined it, Tom Dent, who takes our under-19 team now. And also because there were 7 international players in the first team coaches were coaching in Norwegian. Norwegian was being spoken in were coaching in English. English was being spoken in a lot of the meetings. So I thought I would absorb Norwegian a lot quicker than I actually had. So we've been having a tutor now for probably 14 months, but my Norwegian still isn't at the level where I'd like it to be, and it's something I have to really work hard on to ensure it is, because although I can have perfectly good conversations with players and coaches, I can spot very easily and very simply that when you're trying to get a player to open up to you and have a really proper detailed conversation about how they're feeling or what might be stressing them, to have that conversation, to speak from the heart in a foreign language, is a very difficult one to do. So I have to be able to make sure that even if I can't reply in Norwegian, I can certainly at least take the information on in Norwegian in order to have that level of conversation you need to have as an academy director. And
tell us about the players over there. I mean, we all often associate, physical assets with the Scandinavian players. Big, those Viking boys. Look at the national teams. They're often, 6 foot slow, big units, athletic. Is that the sort of player you're getting through the door?
I think that certainly would have been true of Norwegian football when it had a lot of success in the 1990s and early 2000s, when there was a lot of Norwegian players coming over to play in the Premier League. But I think there's a shift in that now. I was lucky enough to be exposed to a lot of Scandinavian recruitment when I worked at Norwich, so I kind of knew the best players in each of the countries in Scandinavia, from kind of 15 to 20. And what you saw was a new generation of players coming through from each of those countries, who really defied that age-old stereotype of what a Nordic and what a Norwegian footballer looks like. And I think if you look at the modern breed of Scandinavian footballer, from someone like Alexander Isak from Sweden, to some of the young players now coming out of Iceland and of Denmark in terms of Christian Eriksen, and now in terms of Norway as well, a young player from our own academy, Håkon Evjen, who went on to have an unbelievable season last year, his first full season in our first team. He'd made appearances, but his first full season last season, and he went on to get the Norwegian Young Player of the Season and the Norwegian Full Player of the Season award, and got a big move to Holland on the back of it. Technically an unbelievable footballer, great athletic ability in terms of his agility and his ability to change direction and wriggle out of small spaces and create opportunities with a wide range of passes, and his ability to open up the game in the final third. And I think now if you look at the success that Alfie Inge Haaland's having, in terms of the success that Berg at Sheffield United is having, and many others, I think Norwegian football will be riding the crest of a wave over the next few years. And it's a shame, obviously, with international football being delayed as it is over the next few weeks and months, because Norway were going into a playoff situation to qualify for the Euros. But if the Euros are delayed till next summer and the playoffs are delayed as well, I think that might even suit Norwegian football anymore, because all of these players are very young still, and to have a few more months of development under their wing will really serve them well going into that.
Do you think that's a result of a different look, a different recruitment angle in terms of maybe the country evolving the players, a bit like English football, where if you looked at the old English youth teams, used to be very much based on physicality, big units, and when the English DNA came through, Dan Ashworth, Southgate, Dan Machichi, those guys started bringing in change in the culture in the country. Do you think that's happened in Norway?
Yeah, it has definitely. I think it's a little bit further behind on the curve than the UK, just because obviously EPPP was fully implemented in 2012, and there was a lot of great work happening before that as well. So the architects of that, the people that you've mentioned, but also people like John McDermott and Gary Izzet at Crystal Palace, and people like this who've given these young players an opportunity, Neil Bath at Chelsea. So I think the Norwegian football is behind on the curve, but there's a lot of good people now working at the clubs, bringing good ideas through and allowing creative players that opportunity to shine, and creating a learning environment within their own clubs, so that those creative players that might have been overlooked in the past have got the opportunity to go forward and shine and have the opportunity to play.
And what about yourself? What are your personal ambitions in the game?
Yeah, I'd like to become a sporting director or a technical director, maybe here in Scandinavia first, but if not, maybe in the UK. I've been very lucky to be given this opportunity here in Norway, and there's certainly no thought of leaving this opportunity, certainly for the next few years, because it's an unbelievable lifestyle that we're able to have here in Norway, and it's a great club and a real opportunity to make a mark as well in terms of some of the young players who are around it. So there's no hurry in that for me, but I would like my next step to be that, because I think I've been very lucky in the last 23 years to be exposed to lots of great practice, make lots of mistakes, work in very, very different environments, to clubs where you literally had no budgets, to clubs where you had multi-million-pound academy budgets and were working in the Premier League. And I think that opportunity now to put some of that kind of strategic thinking and planning in place at the highest level would be my next natural career step.
And what advice would you have for a young coach who would like to have a career like yourself in the game?
I think two different things. Firstly, you've got to expose yourself to the hours, and those hours might look unglamorous. They might be with players who don't always want to be there, and therefore your learning has to be to create an environment where they do want to be there. But I think it's also just don't say no. I remember when we used to go out and give young coaches the opportunity to come in from universities or from the local community to Norwich and volunteer or be around the coaching group. So these were people who were maybe just having a level 1 coaching qualification to start off with. And some of them sometimes came in and thought, well, if I'm not getting to lead the under-16 session, I don't want to be here. And I was looking thinking, well, actually, our under-16 is someone who's done 10 years of coaching, has an A license, and has 500 or 600 games at the senior level. He's done his time in the trenches, and he's still doing his time now to try and get to where he wants to get to in his career. So just don't say no to opportunities. Say yes to every single opportunity, because you never know where it will lead to.
What about advice to a young player or particularly a parent to a young talented footballer?
I think the most important thing for any young footballer is to be in an environment where they feel happy and they feel appreciated, but they also feel challenged. So I think for a young player, it doesn't matter what category the club is or what division the first team are playing in. If you're happy there and you've got a good group of friends that you're developing with, then you will get to where you want to get to, especially if that is also in a challenging environment. And I think if you look, a story that's being told a lot in Norway at the moment is kind of Alfie Inge Haaland's success story, because obviously Alfie Inge Haaland's the name that's on a lot of lips around European football for the success he's had this season in both the Champions League and at a domestic level. But he didn't even play academy football. He stayed out of academy football to the age of 16 because he was in a great group of friends who were all good footballers. So he had good footballers surrounded around him, and the coach was an A licensed coach, and they were organising games every week against academy teams. So he was in an environment that was challenging for him. He was enjoying it because he was with his friends every single week, and they were playing against good teams every single week to be tested. So I sometimes think you have to forget the badge and look at the environment. Look and ask yourself: are you happy? Are you enjoying going to football training every week? Because if you are enjoying going to football training, you'll have every chance of fulfilling your potential.
And I'd be amiss if I didn't ask you about the My Personal Football Coach app. You guys have just signed up as a club partner. Tell us a bit about your experience with that.
Well, we're a week into using it. It's been something that was on our medium-term targets to try and bring on board this summer, because we have a huge geographic challenge within our county. If you can imagine trying to reach players 6 hours either side of us, north and south, who don't move to the club till they're 16. So they might be in our academy at 13, 14, but a majority of their training is going on in their home environment. So we do a lot of work with club development in terms of working with trainers in those clubs to make sure that their team sessions are matching our methodology, but also to be able to give those players detailed individual work to replicate that outside of their team environment was very important. What fast forwarded it was we felt that with the need to be able to provide really high level technical work now immediately to our players in the club, because the rules in Norway are very, very clear, set out by the government because of the coronavirus. We are not allowed to be on the pitch with our players. That's in the law now. So we can give our players an individual plan, we can discuss it with them and get feedback, but we're not allowed to step on the pitch with them and deliver that session at any level, including first team level. So the need to have that plan in place immediately was fast forwarded, which is why we brought the app in straight away, and the feedback from the players in the first week's been really positive. We've had some great videos with some unbelievable backdrops with them doing it. And it's been tough because a lot of the football pitches in the city are closed down because of obviously what's happening in society right now. And there's a lot of heavy snow in the north of Norway at the moment, so playing space is limited, but the players have been really, really creative in terms of the environment they've created to put those practices on.
Greg, thanks very much, mate. It's been fantastic. Appreciate your time.
Thanks. So I really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the MyPersonalFootballCoach.com Soccer Player Development Podcast. MyPersonalFootballCoach.com's Dynamic Ball Mastery Program is the world's leading online individual technical training program, proven and developed at the highest level in the English Premier League. Sign up now to train like the pros and take your game to the next level. Master the ball, master the game.